See if you can go over there and hit Masterpiece Quilting on that other machine. I'm going. Hey everybody! Welcome to Designer Tips and Techniques. I'm Nancy Scott with Masterpiece Quilting, and welcome to my studio. This is the first of 3 days for the Designer Tips and Techniques here in July. So we're going to be running today, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Every day from noon until 8 o'clock is going to be a different designer sharing some of their favorite tips and techniques. If you've watched mine before, you know that I'm broadcasting from my home studio here in the basement, which means I have a live studio audience here at home. So if you hear pooches, yes, that is my live studio audience. We've got a whole cast of dogs running around here off camera, and my goal is that they stay off camera. So anyway, let me go ahead and get started. What I want to talk to you about today is batting basics. So many times when we're working on our quilts, we're so focused on the quilt top and getting all the piecing correct. And we've got our backing. But we don't spend a lot of time thinking about the batting that goes in the middle and how that batting influences the particular quilt that we're making and the desired look that we want when we get done. So if any of you have brought quilts to me to do long arming on, I ask gobs and gobs and gobs of questions. And we're basically going to go through a lot of those questions right now. First of all, what type of quilt is it? And how are you going to be using it? Is it a bed quilt? Is it going to be used by a child? Is it going to be used by a teenager? Is it going off to college? Is it a wall hanging? Something like this where you want it to hang nice and flat against a wall. Is it a table topper where you want it to be pretty thin so that when you put flowers in the center, you put a candle mat, you put the gravy boat, anything on it, we want it to be nice and flat. So we're going to talk about what type of quilt it is, how it's going to be used. Another one that factors in there is how is it going to be cared for? If it's going off to college, it's going to go in a college washer, a college dryer. It's not going to get folded and laid across the clothesline to dry nice and neatly. So that influences the batting too. More importantly, what look do I want when I get done with the quilt? Is it going to have a lot of quilting in it so that we've got dimension, some 3-dimension coming up? This particular quilt. And lots of times I do this presentation obviously in front of people and we're passing quilts around. So the best you get today is me, and on a Facebook Live video. But this is a wall hanging, and we've got a lot of definition in this quilt where we've got raised and then we've got really tight stitching that brings that dimension out. So that's one of the questions is, do we want that 3-dimension, almost trapunto look? And if so, that's going to influence our batting options. Another one for any type of quilt is how much will the batting shrink when it's washed? And a lot of people don't think about batting shrinking. But one of the things you need to do is check the information on your batting and determine what is the shrink rate on that particular batting. If you're making a king size quilt, we'll just go with 100 by 100, a big quilt, and you've got a quilt that is going to shrink, a batting that is going to shrink 5%. That means when you get done with that quilt, it's quilted and you wash it the first time, 5% shrink is going to bring it back to being a 95 by 95. So what may have fit very nicely or just fit really well on your king size bed now isn't going to fit so well on your king size bed, all because of the batting and whether or not the amount of shrink that is going to come out of that batting. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. And how is it going to be quilted? Pooch right here. That's okay. It's like I can hear chomping on a toy behind me. How is it going to be quilted? If we're going to quilt very densely, that's going to pull in the quilt. We need to have a batting that is going to be able to handle a lot of quilting in that area. Is it going to be quilted very loosely? That's another important factor. Making sure that we've got a batting that can be quilted really loosely and that doesn't have to be super tight when we quilt it. So, like I said, lots and lots of questions, but these are all things that as you're making your quilt, as you're designing your quilt or working with the quilt design, how big you want to make it, that you kind of need to keep here in the back of your head and be thinking about as you're selecting the batting. I've seen so many people who their batting selections are driven simply by what do they have a sale coupon for, and whether that fits what's best for them or doesn't. If you're doing a bed quilt, are you using the quilt for warmth, or is it more decorative where you're going to take it off every night, not actually sleep underneath it? Or is it a quilt that, it's going to be warm? I'm in northern Indiana. It gets cold in the winter here. So we want to have quilts that are really warm for bed quilts. So let me shift gears here. Now that I've got you thinking about all the questions, let's talk a little bit about the different types of batting. And I've got some batting samples here. If we were in person, we would be sending these around for you guys to feel and to handle and to snuggle and to do all that kind of stuff with. But one of the first types of battings that we think about is polyester batting. And growing up with a grandmother who quilted, polyester batting was the only thing that she used. It was Mountain Mist in the roll polyester batting for hand quilting. And now we have a variety of different manufacturers, and I'm not going to dwell a whole lot on the different manufacturers, but we've got poly batting. This is an example of it. A little bit higher loft. Another poly batting, a little bit thinner loft. And I'll just pull out a few more in here that are some poly batting samples. Here's more polys. But you can tell that we've got a variety of loft. Loft is a term that we use to describe the thickness. So we've got a really thin bat here, almost 1/8 of an inch. A little bit thicker here, probably a good 1/8 of an inch. Getting a little bit thicker here. And then one of the thicker battings here. And those are just different examples of poly. So not only do you have to think about what type of batting it is, but also thinking about the weight of the batting and the loft of it. Cotton is another one that is very popular. And we've got cotton in a variety of different weights. Grab a few of them here. Again, cotton bat, heavier hand to it, kind of a mid hand or thickness, and then super light. So we've got cottons in the same ways. We've got wool batting. I love wool batting. It's one of my favorites. A little bit thicker, very breathable. We've got blends. We've got 80-20 blends. We've got 70-30 blends. And those are ones that kind of bring in some of the best of both worlds. And I use a lot of blended. 80-20 is one of my favorite blends. We've got mostly cotton, 80% cotton, but 20% poly. So it gives it that little bit of lightweightness that the poly batting has, but also gives us the drapeability that the cotton bat has. We also have specialty bats. We have flame retardant bats that are perfect for kids' quilts or something like that that would be in a crib situation. We have bamboo bats. We have green bats. We have fusible bats. Green is one that is made with recycled materials. And this is super soft. You would think that it would be, I don't know, I first thought it would be stiff because it was a recycled bat. Super, super soft, very stretchy, very luxurious. We've got This is one of the flame retardant bats. Again, we're not feeling a whole lot of difference, but it's got some additional properties mixed in with it. And I'm watching my time here, because normally when I'm presenting this is 30 minutes, so I've got her condensed down. If you're making a quilt and you're not sure which bat to use, one of the things that I like to do is go ahead and stitch a sample, and then that way you can wash and dry it. And I've got samples stitched up. I wish we were all here together, because I would pass these around and let you do some feeling and touching and seeing what. But this is an 80-20 bat, so you can see the dimension and the difference. This is a super thin cotton, so you can tell that there's not as much loft between the 80-20 and the thinner cotton. What are some of my personal preferences? Table toppers, I want those guys to be nice and flat. So I normally, and they also need to be very, very washable. So I'm using normally a very thin polyester so that we don't have very much shrink out of it, so we don't end up with a puckered up table topper when we get done. And then also running something really, really thin that is going to not cause anything to spill on it. We can also layer our bats. And this particular quilt, this was a wall hanging. Kind of flip it up here so you can see a little bit better. You can see half the wall hanging. Anyway, this is a wall hanging, lots and lots of definition in it. It was one that I've used as a show quilt. It has 2 layers of batting in it, so I've got it double layered. So I know that we've got that extra definition. And this was another quilt that I've got double layered. I'm just going to show part of it for you. But it's got lots of definition in it. You can tell that it is a thicker one. So we've got a thin layer on the back. And yeah, this one is, it's got a colored back or crayoned back on it. But I've got a really thin layer of batting on the back of it, and then a second layer on top that is giving me the definition. So that was a really, really, really super quick primer on batting, covering some of the basics. I know that time-wise I am starting to run out, and I realize that we're trying to keep these at 15 minutes, so that way you guys aren't spending all afternoon and we're not going on and on. But again, I'm Nancy Scott with Masterpiece Quilting. I want to thank you for joining me today. And next up at the 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slot is Charisma Horton. And you'll be able to find her links so that you can watch her. Charisma is a new designer who does really, really cool and awesome stuff. And I know I want to watch her too, and I'm sure that you guys want to also. Again, thanks for joining me. Bye for now.